All right, so today I want to talk about this story out of the Financial Post, and it's titled "Wind Turbine Blades Can't Be Recycled, So They're Piling Up in Landfills." And this is something that I didn't know. I'm sure most people probably don't know up to this point, but this is another big problem with the whole green movement. That number one, it's completely unnecessary to begin with. And number two, even if it is necessary, their solutions to the problem is always just socialism and stuff that doesn't work. Like wind and solar is not viable at this point, not even close to being viable enough. Um, the country with the most wind and solar is Germany, and it still only generates about 20% of their total amount of energy. So you just put those numbers, or think about that for a second and think that wind and solar is nowhere close. We're probably at least 100 years away from it being viable, probably even more than that. And I don't think that it will, at least not within the next really long time, be viable long term. We're talking probably 500 years before there's something better than oil and gas and coal and all that kind of stuff, and even nuclear if you want to put that in there. But why I wanted to talk about this is that, like I always say, climate change is one of the most hotly debated things in Canada, and a lot of people are really brain dead when it comes to this kind of stuff. And like I always mention that even if you believe in climate change and you think it's this big issue, then the things that are currently being done are clearly not working. I mean, carbon tax doesn't reduce emissions, so why are people pushing for a carbon tax? Wind and solar are so inferior that you're literally expecting people to lose money and to have an inferior product. Like, the only people that can afford to power their house off wind and solar are people that are super rich, because you lose money by using wind and solar. Not only that, it doesn't work all the time. So if it decides to, have a minus 40 degree, like we had in Alberta recently, we had 2 weeks of like minus 30, minus 40. If the power cuts off, you're done. Like, you're probably not going to last the day unless you have some really good winter clothing. And a typical winter coat isn't going to cut it when it's that cold. Not only that, you're gonna need some really expensive gloves, like typical winter gloves. Not going to work. So that's the main problem. Like I said, the other problem too is that it's nowhere near competitive enough. Like, people would much. I mean, to be perfectly honest, you'd rather save money. Like I always say that I've made videos about it before, that if climate change was this big issue, then people would be willing to spend a bunch of money on it. Like I use the examples, like when hurricanes happen, people pay 5, 10 times as much for water and food. Um, People pay 5, 10 times as much for the masks in China right now. People are paying more than market price for used ones. Like, that's because this kind of stuff is actually an issue. But when you talk to these climate alarmists, the average person is barely willing to give any money, if any. And it makes no sense, because if it was this big issue, then they would be willing to give a lot of money. Not only that, probably more than what we're currently being stolen from us through the carbon tax and all these regulations. So I wanted to make a video on this because this is something that I'm sure most people don't know, and this is another good argument against the whole wind and solar. Not as if there wasn't enough already, but this is, I think, enough to give you even more ammo when going after and debating these kind of people that are big on climate change. And like I always say too, even in places like, I mean, southern Alberta, it's windier, but in like Edmonton area, it's not very windy and it's not very sunny. So there's no way in hell we're going to be able to rely on wind and solar to get by. Like, it's not going to happen. So we need to keep, I mean, just keep using oil and gas. And like I say too, the burden of proof is still on them. Like, it still boggles my mind how their argument is basic. Oh, everyone agrees with us. Well, no, they really don't. The science really isn't on their side. They just lie about the data, number one, and just repeat over and over and over again millions of times. It seems like, though, climate change is real, climate change is real, 50,000 times. They're brainwashing kids. The mainstream media is brainwashing people. That's how they get by. um, like I always mention too, that the data doesn't show that. Like, the the temperature data, it's not the hottest right now. The ice is going up in Antarctica. Like, I'm still trying to figure out where their data is shown. Not only that, the people that make these big climate change scientists and famous people, none of their predictions even come close to being true. In fact, usually they're the opposite. Usually they say, "Oh, ice is going to be gone by this amount of time," and there's more ice. It'd be one thing if there was, slightly less, but there's more. There was that I think it was Glacier National Park. They said this glacier is going to be gone by 2020. I think they had it was going to be gone by 2010, and they just took the sign down. Like just pretend that we weren't completely wrong. So that's what I wanted to talk about. That like climate change is this issue that's just it's really hurting people, and it, it it really affects the poor too. That's the one thing that really bothers me is that the left always claims, "Oh, we care about the poor so much," but yet inflation and these taxes affect the poor the most because they're the people that if food prices go up 5%, those kind of people are probably already living paycheck to paycheck. How are they going to come up with the money to pay an extra 5% for food? They're not. They're going to go hungry for however much long it takes to make up the difference. If you're upper middle class, well, you big woof. You just cut back a very small amount somewhere else. Like maybe you don't go on quite as nice of a vacation. Like who cares? So that really goes to show the all the people that argue against me just goes to show just how arrogant they are that, oh, we care so much about the poor, but yet you advocate for policies that hurt the poor the most. Like come on, that's something that really bothers me. And even the thing too, like even if you can still afford to get by with how much food prices are going up, you still not want to have more money to spend on other stuff. Like it makes no sense. So anyway, I wanted to make a video about this. If you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe. And like I always say, I do have a PayPal account now. You can donate to me if you want. I'd appreciate that. And last thing, stay tuned for more videos.